Hello everyone, you're very welcome back to the Justice for Aaron Brady campaign. Again, you are probably aware we have been looking at podcasts created by Nicola Tallant, Crime World, I think our podcast is called, and obviously the podcast is in relation to Aaron. Podcast is following on from an article that was created in the Sunday World a few weeks ago. We called her out on this article, inaccuracies, lies and mistruths in the article, and she has bounced back with this podcast. Now, we have looked at the podcast in a few of our previous videos, and we really were looking at, I suppose, just the overall attempt by the two journalists in the podcast to just create a false narrative, and we've shown that quite clearly, and just the pathetic and how poor the preparation and how poor the knowledge is of Nicola Tallant in relation to the murder of Detective Garda Adrian Donoghue. And we have asked the question, why has she even bothered to do this podcast when she is so poorly versed in the detail? So we're going to continue looking at the podcast, and again it's getting very serious now, and I want to take a little bit of time on this little bit. It's actually only, I think, 10 or 15 seconds of Miss Tallant in her podcast, but it's very, very vital we look into the details of this. So first of all, we're going to have a very quick listen and look at Nicola Tallant and what she has to say about the phone silence. Listen to that now.
When it eventually came to court, a lot of it relied on circumstantial evidence, including the fact that all the phones went dead at the point of the robbery.
Yeah, so this is part of the campaign.
So that is the extent of what we're going to listen to from Miss Tallant this evening. And obviously it's very clear what she's saying, all the phones went dead. And this has been a pivotal point and a pivotal part of the prosecution on Garda Síochána and the DPP, and the attempt to totally and completely mislead all those watching and involved in the case. So what we'll do is, obviously, the starting point is Miss Tallant is telling us that all the phones went silent. Who is all these phones? Now, at this moment in time, there were 3 phones silent at this time, at the time of the murder and robbery at Lordship Credit Union. Aaron's and two other young men who were in court in February, March and April this year. So this is the prosecution story. We'll explain that first, and then we'll show you very clearly how it has been manipulated, how the truth has actually been hidden, and how those involved in the investigation were more than happy to pass along information that to all intents and purposes was false, incorrect, and I'll say once again, totally and completely misleading. So this is the graph, this is a replica of the graph that was shown in court. There you can see it. And this is for Friday the 25th of January 2013, and you have 3 phones there, and the black part of the graph is showing activity on phones, and then the space in between is the silence. So you can see where I've marked silence there. Okay, so this has been a very major part of the case, that this was so unusual and a very unique sort of set of circumstances where these 3 phones were silent. And I have to keep repeating 3 phones, because we must remember there was 5 gang members, and it has been said in court that there almost certainly had to be other members of the gang in relation to preparation, scouting cars, all sorts of things was mentioned. So we should have somewhere in the region of 7, 8, 9, or possibly even 10 phones that should have been silent. But we only have 3. And I'll just very briefly mention that Lorcan Stain, junior counsel for the prosecution, on numerous occasions threw out other names in the courtroom of people. He gave the impression that these people may very well be part of the gang. and the lowest form of any form of legal argument whatsoever is to throw this out into the ether and just leave names hanging there that absolutely mean nothing. And we know, because we've looked at the books of evidence and those people that this Lorcan Stain mentioned had absolutely nothing to do with the more than robbery at Lordship Credit Union. They were either at home with their families, they were in a chip shop in Castleblaney, or they were with a number of other friends. So the cheap shot by Lorcan Stain, it was again, used the word pathetic, to say the very least, to try and drive home this narrative of the silence and the phones. And then we had senior counsel for the prosecution, Brendan Grehan. You see him here. Now he gave an opening statement at the beginning of Aaron's trial. This is when the jury came into court in January 2020. And you can see there, Mr Grehan told us that they would not be using cell site analysis, that because of the water and the mountains in the Cooley Peninsula and the Carlingford Lough area, close to where the more than robbery took place at Lordship Credit Union. So Mr Grehan also said during his open statement, and he was very, very vociferous when he told us that this was highly unusual, that these phones were silent at this particular time on the Friday evening, the 25th of January, at the time of the 2013, at the time of the more than robbery. And then we had the media coverage of the silence of the phones, and again, it's thrown out there with very, very little detail. And we'll just show you now just a little clip from the primetime programme that was released immediately after Aaron was found guilty.
Ripon. Brady had more than one phone from 8:29 p.m, 1 hour before the murderous attack, until 10:14 p.m. His phones went dead, as did those of other suspected gang members.
So there we've heard from Barry Cummins, another investigative reporter with RTE, and he too, it tells us that Aaron Brady's phone was silent along with others. Again, very scarce on detail of how many other phones were silent. I repeat once again, the graph, I'm going to bring it up now and again in a second, was for 3 people. And we know there was 5 in the gang and possibly others involved. So there should be, if the investigation was true to what it's saying, there should be 4, 5, 6, 7, possibly 8 to 10 phones silent. If all these gang members were on phone silence. And obviously this, not only prime time, this also drifted into the mainstream media, print and online. And I'm just going to give you a very brief sample of it here. There you go. This is by investigative reporter Robin Schiller, and this is from May 2020. And you can see there, Irish Independent and the Herald, inactive phones, unusual, murder trial told. An intelligent analyst, Mr Mc Gooey, has said it was unusual that the phones belonging to a garda murder accused and 2 other suspects were inactive around the time of the fatal shooting. A court has heard. The jury in the trial of Aaron Brady, 29, has been hearing evidence of mobile phone activity between the accused and a number of other people on the day of the murder. So, a couple of things there. Again, it's only 2 other suspects. So that's Aaron and 2 other suspects. So we still only have 3 phones. And once again, you can see from, I'll show it you there again, unusual is used strongly to try and suggest that the inactivity in these phones on the 25th of January 2013 was unusual. And there's another part of the article there. Yesterday, Mr Mc Gooey, a civilian member of An Garda Síochána, continued giving evidence in relation to call data records. Asked by prosecuting counsel Lorcan Stain SC if one phone going silent was of relevance, the witness said that that in itself was not unusual. Mr Mc Gooey added that what was unusual on the 25th of January was that the phones were inactive, stayed inactive and were reactivated over a very similar period. So again, Mr Mc Gooey tells us that the phones were inactive at the time of the Morden robbery, and that was unusual because the 3 phones were inactive and came on somewhere in and around the same times. And there is quite a differential in the times the phone came on, but we can go into that detail later on. So I suppose the whole thing is here that the prosecution case is, and it's been a very, very strong part of the prosecution and the way the trial was carried out, Aaron's case, through 2019 and 2020. And there was some questions from Aaron's defence during the course of Aaron's trial in relation to phone silences and how many times the phones were silent during the course of January 2013. It probably hadn't been investigated properly by the defence team, or the defence team just hadn't time to analyse the data because of the way the data was disclosed. But during the course of the most recent trial in February, March and April this year, there was more detail in relation to the analysis of the phones. So unusual, let's say, we would say that maybe once or twice in the month of January that the phones were actually inactive. That would be, I think, would be fair to say. So I'm just trying to bring this up. There we go. So there we have 28 days. Now the reason we have 28 days is because that is the length of time phone analyst Edward Mc Gooey used. That's the time span Mr Mc Gooey used to analyse the phones on and off over that period, the first 28 days of January. Now Mr Mc Gooey wasn't available for the new trial. Not sure where Mr Mc Gooey disappeared to, but we had a new analyst, Mr McPhillips, during the course of the most recent trial. So as I say, we would be surprised to learn that, there we go, bring that up, that maybe 6 times during the course of January that someone's phone was off at approximately the same time, from 7 p.m. in the evening till 10, 11 p.m. at night, that same evening. So you might think, well, 6 isn't that unusual. And then if we move to a scenario possibly where we had 12 times that some of those people's phones were inactive in and around that time of the evening, it could be said then that this phenomenon is much less unusual. And then if we moved to another situation where the phones were inactive for 18 times out of the 28 days. So therefore, the assertion by Edward Mc Gooey, lay garda and data analyst, now this man was analysing all this information, and he should have known, and he should have brought it to the attention of the investigation team. And I have no doubt Mr Mc Gooey did know this fact. There is no way he could not have known this fact. It would be impossible for him not to know this, because it would have had to be checked. So here we have a situation where we have Brendan Grehan telling us it's highly, highly unusual in his opening speech in Aaron's trial. We have Lorcan Stain pontificating continually that this was highly unusual. This was absolutely damning evidence that the phones were silent. We have our primetime reporter, Barry Cummins, saying that this is highly unusual. Brady's phone was dead, as was others. And again, on the back of all this, we're still only dealing with 3 people, not the 5 plus the outlaying gang. So it's complete and utter nonsense. And what we have to say here is there has been a concerted attempt by the authorities to hide the truth. There is no way that these people could not have known the fact that these phones were silent at these times for the majority of the month. And I think a quick breakdown is Brendan Traynor is silent for 18 times out of 28 days. James Flynn is silent, I think, for 16 days out of the 28. Aaron Brady's phone is silent, I think, for 15 or 16 times out of the 28. And I think the combined, when you put them together, I think there's 12 or 13 days, almost half of the month, the 3 phones are silent at the same time. So here we have a situation where the prosecution are trying to create circumstantial evidence that simply isn't evidence. In fact, the opposite is true. And we go back again and just play exactly what Miss Talent said again.
Including the fact that all the phones went dead at the point of the robbery.
Yeah, so this is...
There we go. So Miss Talent is saying there very clearly that the phones were off. Now, I think there was at least 2 Vodafone employees and phone analyst and independent analyst, and there's no way of saying that the phones were off. In fact, it cannot be said that the phones were off or switched off. And this is also very, very important. Tests were carried out, we'll say, for example, where Brendan Traynor lived. And where he was living at that time, he actually had to leave his house. More often than not, he had to leave his house, walk out of the cul-de-sac and onto sort of a main road to get coverage. So that would explain that his phone is inactive. It's not dead, just simply no signal. Well, we live here sort of along the border with the mountains here behind us, and the poor coverage from the UK mass and the restricted coverage from the Republic of Ireland mass. It leaves us very often in very, very poor coverage. And that would be the reason why the phones were silent. And there is no evidence whatsoever, Miss Talent, that anyone had their phone switched off. None whatsoever. So what is the outcome of this information? The outcome of this information is that, to all intents and purposes, the prosecution got this pushed through and got the media to hype it up during the course of Aaron's trial. Fair enough, they got away with it, to all intents and purposes. But during the course of the most recent trial, the garda analyst, Mr Mc Gooey wasn't there. Now, I don't know why Mr Mc Gooey wasn't available to follow on with his information. We have said before that Mr Mc Gooey did tell lies during the course of his testimony in Aaron's trial, but he wasn't there for this most recent trial. Mr McPhillips actually carried out the data analysing of the information, and it was the garda analyst who brought the details back on the request of the defence team for Mr Traynor and I think Mr Traynor and Mr Flynn. And this is the information he came back with. 18 times out of the 28 days, phones were silent for the same period of time, or in that block period of time. So it's difficult to understand. One of the cornerstones of the prosecution has been absolutely rocked. It's not been rocked, it has been crumbled, it has been annihilated, it has been wiped away completely. And not a word from Cummins, Schiller, Reynolds, and, well, Nicola Talent hasn't a clue about what went on in the court case anyway. So, but obviously she did not do any research into what she was saying. You've seen how excited she was, saying, oh, and all the phones were off. All the phones weren't off. So it's a very, very important part of how Aaron was convicted. And it shows that his conviction is based on a lie. His conviction is based on misuse of information that was withheld and was not properly given to the defence team. Pat Murray, Mark Phillips, Christy Mangan, Martin Beggy, all the major players in the investigation team in Fort Apache, Dundalk, told us that this was the most extensive and the most manpower ever put into an investigation here in Ireland. And I have no doubt every one of them men and more that I have mentioned there now knew that one of the cornerstones of the prosecution case was a lie. That slide there is a lie. It was portrayed as a lie. That slide there is not a true reflection of what happened in January 2013. This slide is not only applicable to January the 25th, it is applicable to almost 20 days in the month of January 2013. So there we have it, folks. We have a 10 or 15 second piece of video from Nicola Tallant, and that is the outcome of it. It shows clearly what we've had to contend with, what we've had to live with when we know these facts. The facts I've given you there this evening in relation to the phone silence cannot be contradicted. They have been trashed out in a court of law here on this island, and those are the real facts, not the story that is being peddled by the likes of Nicola Tallant shouting, oh, the phones were silent, the phones were off. So once again, this thing that is unusual, a lie. This thing that the phones was off is a lie. This thing that it only happened on the 25th of January 2013 is a lie. So that's another little bit of Miss Tallant's podcast looked at. We will continue. There's a lot more in it. There's going to be a few more videos on it, but it does give us the opportunity to take this narrative that we've always said is a false narrative, and they have to continue peddling it, and we will continue to prove that it is a false narrative. Thank you so much for watching our videos. Please continue to like, comment and share. I'm going to keep asking, please keep hitting the like buttons. Please pop us a comment or a thumbs up. Please, if you can and you feel inclined to do so, please subscribe to Aaron's Justice for Aaron Brady YouTube channel. I keep repeating it, but we do need to fight against the way we are being attacked on our social media platforms and Aaron's website. So please do that for us. And again, if those of you, I know we have more new viewers coming along and new people joining and watching the campaign. If you do feel so inclined, please contact your local public representative, whether it be a local councillor, TD, MP or whatever. Please drop them a line and ask them to look at the Aaron Brady case, because this is one of the most serious miscarriages of justice on the island of Ireland. And I think all public representatives should be aware of it, and please highlight that to any of your representatives in your area or in any area for that matter. Thank you once again, and we'll see you in the next video where we're going to look at, it actually follows on very nicely from this, where we're accused again in the wrong of making comments about circumstantial evidence, but we'll deal with that in the next video. Thank you, and we'll see you then. Thank you.